27 December 1979. It was a day when Soviet troops rolled into Afghanistan in a bid to take charge of a volatile political situation in the country. A series of political developments in Afghanistan led to the Soviet Union invade and occupy Afghanistan. They considered Afghanistan a gateway to Central Asia. From their perspective, any movement in Afghanistan by the Americans was unacceptable. More than 75,000 Soviet troops rolled in and took control. They helped install Babrak Karmal as the new leader of the nation. It's been 37 years since, but violence still continues. But few would have thought that this invasion would plunge Afghanistan into this 4-decade cycle of conflict. 37 years since the Soviets invaded the occupied and Afghanistan, what has changed? Actually, not much. Check out the story.
More than 5,000 civilians were killed in Afghanistan in the first 6 months of this year. According to the United Nations, 1/3 of these casualties were children, with some 388 killed in the same period. This figure is 18% more than last year. Of course, this is nothing compared to the 1 million who died during 9 years of the Soviet occupation beginning 1979. But it underscores how little life has changed for the average Afghan. They were dying then, they are dying now. And the players remain largely the same with a few additions. What's old? The Taliban remains the most visible and prominent player, with its insurgents targeting government, army, police and civilians. What's new? The Haqqani network is now seen as the fighting army of the Taliban. Pakistan performs the role of support and sanctuary for the Taliban. Russia is talking to the Taliban. China is also talking to the Taliban. The US retains a small military presence. Iran has allowed the Taliban to open an office there. The Islamic State has a small presence in eastern Afghanistan. India, which was isolated as long as the Taliban ruled Afghanistan, is back in the game, seeking to balance Pakistan's influence. But after investing more than $1 billion in rebooting that country's infrastructure, in capacity building and providing scholarships and training, it is clear that this great game requires not only deep pockets, but lots of planning and infinite patience. Bureau Report, WION.
It was indeed the great game, as they called it. The challenge was, who is going to win this great game? In the 50s, the Americans rolled into Afghanistan, established airports in Kandahar, and then went on to constantly challenging the Soviets. The Soviets decided that it was time to oust the Americans out of Afghanistan. So they rolled in. But it was the time for the Americans and the Pakistanis to join hands. What happened was they enrolled a lot of what they call the Mujahideen. CIA printed literally hundreds and thousands of Qurans, dropped them across Afghanistan and Pakistan to try to enroll people to push the Soviets back out. It was a bloody war, and literally tens and tens of thousands of people died. To discuss this issue, we are joined by Mr. Intizar Khadim. He's the former communication director in the Independent Directorate of Local Governance from Kabul. Also joins us live is Taha Siddiqui, WION's correspondent and bureau chief based in Islamabad. Mr. Khadim, let me start by asking you, when you look back and see what has happened to Afghanistan in the last 4 decades almost, where is it today? What's going on?
Well, thank you very much for asking this question. I think Afghanistan is a fantastic country, but sadly, the Russian invasion just destroyed all the foundation of democracy, all the foundation of development, and all kind of stuff that we had hoped for that for the future. For the time being, I think we cannot compare Afghanistan of today with the Afghanistan of 1970s and 80s and 90s. Afghanistan just vastly changed both in content, both in shape, both in mentality. But one thing which is really clear and that's existing from very far past is the violences. Every day we are witnessing killings of many civilians. I had a memory from one of the top government leader who said in Afghanistan for me that only in the month of August, 1,500 people were died or killed in Afghanistan. For the time being, if there's war of 33 provinces out of 34, I think that's a horrible and horrendous and scary story. I mean, many of the people in the world in Afghanistan will be seeing Afghanistan as a kind of country where we are moving toward prosperity. Definitely, there is hope, there is commitment, and the Afghan president and Afghan leadership is strongly committed to change the destiny of Afghanistan. But for the time being, what we are looking here, I think we're leaving one bad day and moving a good day tomorrow. All these kind of things that happen today and we're witnessing today is because of from the last 37 years. If Russia were not invaded Afghanistan today, we will not be having kind of violent mentality.
Right.
So I think it's a black and white story, and we are hoping for the best and prepare for the worst.
Right. Mr. Karim, what's happened in Afghanistan, it has seen certainly an upswing in development. I was there just a few years ago again, and I've seen a lot of construction come back. I've seen the ray of hope again, of people hoping that they will have peaceful lives in some ways. But it has been a challenge. On the other side of the border, in Pakistan, it has been a challenge for them as well since the 70s, after they got involved in pushing the Soviets out with the American help. It has been an extremely tumultuous time for them. Taha, can you set this story in perspective? The role of Pakistan in the 70s and then onwards.
Well, I think Pakistan has
No, hang on, Mr. Karim. It's Taha who's giving us perspective on Pakistan.
Oh, that's fine.
Well, basically, so if we start from the 70s, we know Pakistan invited some sort of religious scholars from Afghanistan. For example, Gulbuddin Hikmatyar was invited back in the 70s. This was the era that Pakistan had just gone through the sort of the separation of Bangladesh, and there was a sort of a Pashtun movement at that time in KP and Fatah areas, which border with Afghanistan. At the same time, there was the Baloch rebel movement. So Pakistan decided, as a policy matter in 70s, to sort of invite religious scholars and infuse this sort of Islam and Pakistan identity and Islamize the people over there. Then later on, we do know that the Soviet invasion happened, in which Pakistan got involved with the American help, with the Saudi money of training the jihadis, which they were already in touch with during the 70s, early 70s already. But then they trained these jihadis, and then they were sent, which later on morphed into the Taliban government in the mid-90s. But what happened, I mean, at the same time, this was happening, refugee inflow into Pakistan. We do know that Pakistan currently still hosts around about 3 million of Afghan refugees. But at the same time, another thing that they do, that they're accused of, and definitely we as journalists have seen while reporting evidence of this, that the Afghan Taliban movement, ever since 9/11 has happened, has moved to Pakistani tribal areas, has moved to Pakistani other places in Pakistan, and they operate out of that. And definitely we do see evidences of that. For example, the Afghan Taliban chief, this year alone, the drone strike that happened that killed him, that was in Balochistan. He was carrying Pakistani documents, identity papers. So in that sense, Pakistan is on and off constantly supported this sort of Islamist militant movement, and has taken in a lot of refugees. And also another thing that has happened in Pakistan because of what is happening in its neighborhood, or what it's alleged to do, is that in Pakistan we've seen Islamization itself. The Pakistani Taliban group were emanated from this Afghan Taliban group, which have wreaked havoc on Pakistan itself. They have attacked Pakistani Institute, Pakistani infrastructure. So there has been a lot of destruction in Pakistan also in the last 30 years.
Taha, thank you for putting the story in perspective. You've raised some very good points there. It has been a challenge both on the Afghan and the Pakistan side. how to handle this. There has been certainly a movement towards Islam and making sure that Islam becomes the predominant way of looking at things there. But certainly there have been tremendous challenges. We'll come back and talk a bit more about it. We'll talk about how the Taliban was established in the 90s and then 2001. On that note, it's time for a short break on Gravitas. When we return, we look at what has changed in Afghanistan in 37 years, and if at all. We will be back, so stay with us on Gravitas. Welcome back. You're watching Gravitas on WION. And today, in our special edition, we're looking at Afghanistan. The great game continues. Taha, let me ask you one more question before I lose you there. The Pakistan government seemed to have played a major role in the establishment of the Taliban and the support to the Taliban until 2001, when General Musharraf decided to turn its back on the Taliban. Certainly, the Afghans have pointed the finger at Pakistan. How has the Pakistani government responded to this, and how critical has the Afghan government been?
Well, we've seen that Ashraf Ghani, when he came into power 2 years ago, at that time, he said that he wanted to sort of reset the relationship. We saw with Karzai before that, Pakistan and Afghanistan, the relationship was not that good, and there were tensions. But when Ashraf Ghani came into power, he said that he wanted to reset the relationship and sort of, believe in Pakistan and because it's a neighbor. And we did know that Karzai also, Pakistan accused Karzai of being very closer to India. That was one of the paranoias that Pakistani establishment had. But then 2 years later, we've seen that particularly this year, Afghanistan and Pakistan relations have further again sort of deteriorated. And we've seen that Ashraf Ghani has accused Pakistan of once again sponsoring militancy in Afghanistan. And that has come after some evidences of reports that have suggested that, for example, the Quetta Shura operates out of Balochistan. We've seen that the current chief.
We are losing you there. One of the challenges of the Quetta Shura was that had been used to establish its presence in Kandahar to take over Afghanistan. Pakistan, in its strategic policy, decided that it will use Afghanistan as strategic depth, which means it can operate out of Afghanistan and continue going after the rest of the northern areas, which was Northern Alliance, and then it was another group which was working out of Mazar-e-Sharif. Now, this was a challenge for Pakistan. How does it crush the insurgency that was developing in the FATA areas with the Pakhtuns? And two, how does it get involved in Afghanistan so that its own FATA areas are not touched in any way? Also, the northern areas were closer to India, and that in itself was a challenge for Pakistan. Before we go on further, let us look now at the genesis of this problem, how it all began and where it's reached.
In Afghanistan, it is remembered as Black Day. December 27, 1979, when the former Soviet Union invaded and occupied Afghanistan and through force of arms attempted to transform a country that had not even known feudalism into a modern communist republic. It was doomed to disaster.
It was such a big war. The world was overwatching. Afghans gave massive sacrifices. They had millions and millions of martyrs. The disables are even out of count. Millions of others migrated who are still spending days and nights in other countries.
The Russian intervention was primarily driven by the need to secure a fledgling communist government under President Hafizullah Amin. His attempts to improve ties with Pakistan and the US, combined with more nationalist views, provoked the Soviets to invade and replace him with Babrak Karmal.
په دنیا کې ګوري د خپل منافع د خاطر یې چیرته ځي.
See, every country in the world goes to another country for its own interests, not for the interests of that country. However, the governments we had were legitimate. They were following the rules and they had everything required for a government and civil service. So there was a government and rule, but now there is not.
Our neighbors, for example, Pakistan and Iran, benefits for Russian invasion. They took that advantage of it. They used Afghans. And until now they strive to reach to their strategic goals.
The end of the occupation and the Russian withdrawal did not mend matters. Afghanistan, radicalized and hardened by so many years of war, dislocation and displacement, descended into civil war with Mujahideen factions fighting each other to become masters of Kabul. Bureau Report, WION.
The challenge was to see how Afghanistan is going to continue onwards and is able to crush the insurgencies. But that doesn't seem to end ever. The Taliban is back in, still continuing to pressurize the government in power. The government in power isn't just Tajik or Uzbek or Pakhtun. It's an amalgamation of all forces, but certainly there are too many forces which don't want Afghanistan to succeed. The army size is small, only 150,000 soldiers compared to most of the armies around Afghanistan. For example, Pakistan has an army of almost 1 million, and on the other side, Iran. Iran doesn't really interfere, but certainly a very, very challenging situation. Joining us to talk a bit more about this is Mushtaq Rahim. Mushtaq, give me a little sense of where is Afghanistan going as we look into the future here, because certainly the challenges aren't ending anytime soon.
Yeah, Afghanistan has been faced with the problems of insurgencies, as you reported earlier, since 1979, where after the Russian invasion, the militant effort was started under the tag of jihad in Afghanistan. And it continues to this day. Unfortunately, this whole effort has been utilized by the neighbors of Afghanistan in the region to achieve their strategic goals, and they continue to do so till this day. And Afghanistan continues to fight extremism and radicalized mindsets in different parts of the country. However, looking at the progress made over the course of last decade, and particularly over the course of last 3 to 5 years, we can see that Afghan security forces have been in a position to fight the extremist militant groups in Afghanistan, though they continue to challenge the government threat in different parts of the country. However, I think the government forces have been able to hold them back. In the meantime, there have been talks as part of the peace process, but more importantly, the world has recognized the fact that how the neighbors of Afghanistan are monopolizing this whole militancy thing in their favor for pursuing their own strategic goals in the country. So if I can give you a summarized answer to your question, is that Afghanistan continues to fight extremism, and there is no doubt that it will continue to continue this fight against extremism for at least next few years. But the overall thinking is positive, because the world has realized that without a stable Afghanistan that is able to stand up to the extremism, world cannot have a peaceful environment. And that's why I feel that Afghanistan is heading into a direction where stability and peace should prevail over the extremist attitudes.
Right. Mr. Karim, let me ask you, there has been some Chinese involvement in Afghanistan. There also has been involvement, still continued involvement of the Americans. The Indians have also been involved in a lot of the development work. The Pakistanis certainly, they are next door neighbors. Explain to me, with all these forces from all these sides, how can Afghanistan find peace?
Well, looking to Afghanistan, which is moving towards sustainability in ensuring the economic development of Afghanistan, I think the hosting of all these powers, including Chinese and Indians in the number of other international countries in Afghanistan, is one of the inevitable measurements for us. I think Chinese is trying to face Indians, and importantly the Americans in Afghanistan, where they should not occupy all the economic initiatives. So for the time being, there are some mines that has been contracted with Chinese. By the way, there's the MPTA, one of the largest mine companies that was just proposed by Indians in Afghanistan. There was like a hit clash between the two sides. And I'm sure that the Indian will be trying to ensure a strategic relationship with the Afghan government. By the way, if you see the involvement of the Chinese for the last 10 years, I mean, that has been for naught. I mean, that's nothing. Including, I mean, considering the economic power or maybe the strategic importance of the Chinese in the region, so far only 10,000 houses have been promised by the Chinese government to Afghanistan, which is nothing. Well, I can give you two scenarios. From 2001 onward to 2005, I think there was this kind of settlement between the Russians, the Chinese, and the American government, that the American can come to Afghanistan and all these three forces will be mustering support to crush Taliban or maybe insurgency. In 2005, in 2006, Russia and Chinese have seen their picture, dim picture, and they say that there's no room for them to be engaged and involved in Afghanistan. After that, the Russians and also the Chinese started to fight or to confront with the Americans and a number of other powers in Afghanistan. So if you look back to the big scenarios, I think these three powers, I mean the Americans and also the Chinese and the Indians, and including Russia, which is trying or focusing more on the military side, I think there's a kind of clash, sometimes directly and sometimes as a proxy war. And at the same time, there's three important things. Number one, America and Chinese are trying to confront each other in Afghanistan in terms of economy or the political influences. Iran and Saudi Arabistan is trying to combat their religious war, and at the same time, India and Pakistan is trying to hedge their political influence in Afghanistan. Well, these proxy wars and these confrontations will just like make Afghanistan or maybe drive Afghanistan into unknown destination. I think that's scary for me.
It is one of those challenges. Afghanistan gets embroiled in all the proxy wars, and that in itself continues to be one of the challenges. Certainly, we've seen Afghanistan suffering. It certainly has a ray of hope when it looks at Central Asia, whether it's Tajikistan, whether it's Uzbekistan, or it's Kazakhstan. So certainly, Afghanistan capable of succeeding, but the powers on its west and the powers on its east have other agendas. And that's something that's going to continue to dog Afghanistan in many, many ways. Let's get a closing statement from you, Mr. Rahim. Tell us where and what kind of a strategy will be required if we want to end this cycle of violence, almost 4 decades now.
Well, it's such a complex scenario here, the conflict scenario in Afghanistan, that one single strategy might not work. But I think Afghan government should ensure, first of all, balance its relation with its regional neighbors and international supporters, such as the West and particularly America. Chinese want a fair share of the economic opportunities in Afghanistan, and Russians are worried, Iranians are worried. I think the best way forward for Afghanistan will be to balance these relationships and disallow these countries to use Afghan territory for their proxy wars and for pursuance of their strategic goals. That will be the first thing. Second thing, I think Afghan government should continue using the international forums to put pressure on the neighboring countries, particularly on the eastern side of the country, that is Pakistan, to ensure that the sanctuaries are removed for the militants in Pakistan, and as such, Afghan government don't have to deal with the people infiltrating from the porous borders of Afghanistan on the eastern side. So the international forums such as the UN and NATO and SARC and other regional and international forums should be utilized to pressurize those people who are trying to muddle into the internal affairs of Afghanistan. And thirdly, I think the agenda for peace making and negotiation process should be furthered. There should be more effort towards talks with the warring Taliban groups in order to bring them into the national mainstream and allow them return back to civilian life where they can have their political presence. So I think these different set of strategies will have to be adopted by the government of Afghanistan to get rid of the current situation.
Right. Mr. Karim, your closing statement talking about how can Afghanistan move forward and what kind of an appeal it would have to make to Pakistan to stop meddling in its affairs.
Well, we cannot stack in the past. We have to think on the future. I think it's a best adage to say that we have to prepare for the worst and hope for the best. I think Pakistan has been engaging in Afghan issues in many ways. I mean, the word is understanding the rules for the time. Afghanistan cannot die in the water and cannot just say this blame game all the time. There is a set of homework for the Afghan government too to do it. Because sometimes if you just blame other people for something happening in your own country and you're not doing anything or doing not enough, I think that's not a good political tactics in the modern history. For the last 14 years, there has been a kind of strategic blunders that has been committed both by the neighbor countries, international community, and also Afghanistan. For example, the Afghans need very direly the peace and reconciliation process. For the last 14 years, we just rely more on guns, and there was very little attention to peace and reconciliation. The second thing was the investment on an individual interest in forgotten the national interest. For the coming 1 decade or at least 4 or 5 years, there should be a much focus on national interest, where every citizen of Afghanistan should see himself in the political mirror of Afghanistan. And third, there was much focus on Kabul and forgotten the provinces of Afghanistan, and there was much focus on Afghanistan and forgotten the region. Now, if we look back to the 14 years in the past, I think there was some problems that emerged from regional partners and also from the neighboring countries. In the future, we have to understand our role. We have to have an open criticize or diatribe or kind of statement toward the neighbor country. We cannot just mutter. We cannot just keep all the words in our heart and mind, because our heart and mind is bleeding every single day. We're losing life and we're losing civilians in Afghanistan. How long we will be suffering and we will be bearing the brunt of the vicious strategy of the neighbor country.
Right.
At the same level, international community should not do their confrontation in Afghanistan. They have to consider the humanity and the morality, and they should make Afghanistan great again and at least let the Afghan people live in the peace and prosperity for the future.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Karim, and thank you, Mr. Rahim, for your thoughts. The challenges, as many as those exist outside Afghanistan, also exist within Afghanistan. There are multiple groupings, and certainly it needs to find its own peace within first. So the challenge for the region is going to be how does it balance its relationship with Afghanistan, but the region in itself needs to find peace. The region needs to find peace between India, Pakistan, and Afghanistan, so that this can become a contiguous corridor going towards Central Asia and going towards Southeast Asia. Until all of these powers decide that they want to work together, the region will not be as quiet and will not be as peaceful. Thank you very much, both of you, for joining us. Stay with us on the other side of the break. We'll come back to you with all the news in South Asia and the world. Thanks for watching Gravitas. And on the other side of the break, you will get Aisha Sindhu giving you the top news.